So welcome to today's webinar, Web Accessibility for E-commerce, a blind customer's perspective. We're delighted to have all of you with us, as well as our special guest speaker, Joseph DiNero, Assistant Program Director of Assistive Technology Services at Helen Keller Services for the Blind. This webinar is produced by UsableNet, a recognized leader in accessibility and digital inclusion. And our first speaker is Jason Taylor, Chief Innovation Officer here at UsableNet, and he'll tell you a little bit more about us. And I'm actually going to go ahead and hand you off to Jason now. Jason, can you get us started?
Certainly can. Thank you, Bethany. Thanks everybody to spend some time with us, and for those who download this after the live presentation as well. What I want to achieve today, and I'll go through the agenda shortly, is just first to introduce UsableNet. Sometimes people come to these events and aren't exactly sure, let's say, the role of UsableNet and why we cover these subjects in this detail. But UsableNet's been around 20 years. We essentially help a wide range of companies do as best job as they can to make sure that their digital experiences are as inclusive as possible. And essentially, one of the things that we do as part of that, and you're going to hear this in part of the presentation, is we track a lot of the sort of legal activity that's going on in the space, particularly around e-commerce. So we want to wind some of that into this presentation for you to understand why e-commerce is such a focus in the legal space, what a typical lawsuit looks like, but then also give you a practical view from Joe DiNero, who's a daily user of ScreenReader. What is a website that has had good attention with regard to digital accessibility? How does that experience differ for him to a site that probably hasn't had the type of attention that it should have had with regard to digital accessibility? So, what you're going to hear is a number of sort of factual numbers at the start about why e-commerce is sort of a target of these types of lawsuits. As a company, we track these lawsuits primarily to make sure our clients know what are the trends in this space, in particularly what are the types of barriers that are being identified in these cases, so our clients can prioritize around particular barriers to make sure that, one, they're increasing the accessibility of their experiences, but two, immediately reducing their risk of lawsuits like this. So we'll cover some of the big numbers. Then Joe's going to talk about his experience around specific elements with regard to what's in those lawsuits, and give you some practical actual experience listening to his experience on two sites. One site that's done a lot around digital accessibility, and one that appears to have not have done so much around digital accessibility. And then, as Bethany said, we're going to have a bunch of time for Q&A at the end. I just want to actually start by maybe just introducing Joe DiNero and having him talk just a little bit about himself and his role at Helen Keller Institute, so you sort of understand his position and where he comes from with regard to his experiences with assistive technology for his own personal use, but also how he works for Helen Keller in his particular role. So, Joe, welcome, and could you maybe give us a little bit of a background around yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jason. So my name is Joseph DiNero. I am the Assistant Program Director of Assistive Technology Services at Helen Keller Services for the Blind. So we are an agency that provides services to blind and low vision individuals from childhood all the way through adult, providing services in the areas of mobility, daily living skills, social work, job placement, low vision services, and in my area, assistive technology services. So what we do within my department is we provide training, evaluating students and providing training to them so that they have the skills that they can use either a mobile device or a desktop computer to pursue either educational and or vocational goals. So that's sort of my role in at Helen Keller Services. And when I'm not wearing that hat, I am the sort of the team lead at UsableNet for the digital accessibility testing team. So we provide user testing to clients and help them show them the results that we find from doing usability and accessibility testing for them to the WCAG 2.1 standards. So, and I'm also a certified trusted tester through the Department of Homeland Security.
Thanks, Joe. And maybe, Joe, if you're comfortable, maybe you could just sort of share your own personal journey of becoming a sort of daily user of assistive technology.
Yep. So prior to doing the jobs that I do, I used to work in the hotel industry. I spent nearly 10 years in that field. In 1994, I was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa, which is a degenerative retinal disease. And so the journey has been, in 2002, I started to use a white cane to get around. In 2005, I started to use Zoom text magnification software. So I used magnification software for approximately 8 or 9 years. And probably about 2014 or so, I migrated over to using JAWS, and I am a screen reader user now full-time.
Great. So Joe's going to talk to us about his general experiences and how this sort of dovetails up with what we see in terms of a very strong focus in the legal space on e-commerce sites. And I wanted to sort of cover that, about what you should know about that and take away from that sort of data points. So the first major data point that we sort of want to come up with is just how prolific these lawsuits are becoming. And it's been something that's basically been growing rapidly over the last 5 years. We've been producing a biannual report, and if you've not seen that, they're free to download from our website. And essentially, we track only lawsuits which are filed under the ADA, either federally or state, and the subject matter is a website or an app or some type of digital property, so not the physical ADA lawsuits. And really, there's a couple of big numbers on this screen. We talk about that the big number changing from 2018, around 2,000, to this year, again, over 4,000 lawsuits. And of those, 77% of them are against e-commerce sites. The takeaway from this, if you're in the e-commerce space, is this isn't 4,000 individuals that have struggled with using a particular e-commerce site and then hired 4,000 lawyers to then represent them. This is a very focused group of plaintiffs and plaintiff firms. So of those 4,000, around 80% of them are around 20 plaintiffs and about 10 plaintiff firms. This means that they are looking for targets. They are going out there and aggressively testing e-commerce sites to find sites that they feel fit their profile with regard to creating a lawsuit around. Primarily, they're looking for e-commerce sites who have not taken accessibility seriously, where its plaintiff has problems with regard to using a screen reader. So essentially, the takeaway here is e-commerce is the favorite place for these plaintiff firms to look. And this is a weekly activity that is done by a very focused group of plaintiff firms. So every week there's 100 lawsuits filed pretty much across America, and between 70 and 80 of those are targeted against e-commerce. Next slide, Bethany, if I can. So in the beginning, and we'll talk about this, but over the last 5 years, e-commerce, the top 500 e-commerce sites have been targeted aggressively by these law firms. So essentially, this year about 20% of the top 500 received a lawsuit, and over the last 5 years, 78% of those top 500 e-commerce sites have received lawsuits. But it's not just these top 500, because actually, if you think about it, there's 4,000 lawsuits a year, right? And 77% of those are e-commerce, and there was only 100 in the top 100 this year. So all the rest are coming from mid-market to low market. And actually, there are no sort of small, there is no limit with regard to the size of the e-commerce site that can be targeted. So we talk about, and in this slide is basically showing that 70% of those 3,500 lawsuits this year were filed against e-commerce companies under $50 million in revenue. So essentially, there is nothing in the ADA. There's nothing in the ADA that protects small businesses in this particular space. So it doesn't really matter whether you're a small e-commerce company or a big one. If you've got a website, and you'll see in the report, and we cover it in Java. So specifically, if you're doing business in New York City or California, you should be aware of what these types of lawsuits are claiming, because that will give you a roadmap of how to try to reduce your risk by understanding what is being claimed in these lawsuits. And actually, that should bring me to, so what are the typical barriers listed in these claims? So again, I told you, it's a process that plaintiff firms go through and plaintiffs do. But basically, the first thing is that the vast majority, I'd say 99% of them, are filed by someone with a visual impairment, which means they're either a full-time screen reader user like Joe, or they might use a Zoom text. But essentially, they are someone who is relying on screen reader technology to navigate and use a website. There are subsets or individual cases which are aimed at the deaf community. So, for example, we know of a plaintiff firm with a plaintiff who is deaf, and they focus primarily on video content. But the vast majority of these cases are filed by screen reader users. The first thing that's identified is that screen reader user could not complete tasks. So one of the things is, whether it's couldn't select a product because of the color, because of the size, couldn't add it to cart. And more nowadays, screenshots of that behavior are being documented by the users and added to the lawsuit. The next thing that you might see is that they reference that something's been added to the website to try to help them, but it doesn't help them. So there are cheap solutions out there that basically emphasize things like they're called widgets. They look pretty good to people who don't use assistive technology. They look to add a functionality that probably can help different types of people with different disabilities. But to screen reader users, the widget is no use. And for them, they even start to list it as part of the reason why they're having problems on a website. And then finally, they will find a list of general issues against general guidelines. And we can talk about the guidelines, but essentially, there's a way to test your website to see if there's like low-hanging fruit of issues that you could fix. The lawyers do the same thing to find things to put into the lawsuit. So we'll talk about some of those things about what you can do. And Joe will demonstrate some of these sort of low-hanging issues when he does the demo for us next. And actually leads me to sort of hand over to Joe and talk about some of those barriers. And hopefully we'll get to experience that in his way through some videos that he made for us earlier this week.
Okay, so you're about to see a video where I'm navigating two different websites. One that has really good accessibility in place, and one that is going to need some work. And it's just a small snapshot of each homepage. So you're going to hear me talk through, like, some of the navigation techniques I use when I would initially come to an e-commerce site, and then, how I would step through it, and a demonstration of, the good things and the things that need work. So I am on the Amazon.com website right now, and typically the first thing that I would do when I navigate on any website is use heading navigation. So navigate by the headings that are on the page. So I would do that by just hitting the letter H on my keyboard, and it just takes me through the headings that are on the page. So I'm going to hit H now.
0 to today, heading level 2. Link S, heading level 2, 0 to today. Link S, link shop deals with Prime, try before you buy. Link S, link sweaters. Gifts for your Valentine, heading level 2.
So gifts for my Valentine.
Link sweaters. Link bags. Blank. Winter fashion finds, heading level 2.
So it's reading me, kind of, so the headings give you an idea of what content you should expect under that heading. So,
blank, heading level 2, winter fashion finds.
So winter fashion finds. So the content that's under this heading should reflect that heading.
Link all fashion. Link women. Blank. Link men. Link kids. Blank. Valentine's Day gift cards, heading level 3. Link shop the selection. Top deal, heading level 2. Link graphic True Remedy Premium Organic Body Wash and Balm. Link up to 59% off top deal.
So again, top deals, it tells you what the product is. The content under it gives me what the product is. It mentions that it's a top deal and how much off the product it is.
The warm dash weather edit, heading level 2. Viral Hall of Fame, heading level 2. Shop deals and try for free, heading level 2. Link sweaters under $40. Shop deals and try for free, heading level. Link sweaters under $40.
So, and I'm also listening to the links, and the links are very clear in conveying the information of where these links are going to navigate me to. So if I continue to down arrow.
Link tops under $30. Blank. Link jeans under $50. Link shoes under $75.
Right. So each one of those, shoes under $75. So when I enter on that link, I'm expecting to go to a page that brings me to shoes under $75. And if I continue to navigate.
Bestsellers in books, heading level 2. List of 30 items. Link graphic Little Blue Trucks Valentine: a Valentine's Day book for kids. Link graphic baking yesteryear: the best recipes from the 1900s to the 1980s.
Again, a list of books and, an appropriate content under the heading.
Bestsellers in cell phones and accessories, heading level 2.
Okay. So
Amazon.com, spend less, smile more.
Once I use heading navigation to kind of get a feel for the structure of the page, the next thing I want to do is I want to go back up to the page, and I want to navigate, and I'm just going to use arrow navigation down through the page, because I want to see, do they have any sort of navigation menus? Where is the content to find the information about like signing in if you have an account, and if there's card information and all that stuff. I want to kind of get a feel for where all those things are located. So on the down arrow now.
Skip to main content. Navigation region. Link Amazon. Hello. Select your address. All. Search in. Combo box collapsed all departments. Search Amazon. Search Amazon edit. Banner region. Navigation escape. Go button. Link choose a language for. So
it's got a search. Has a combo box where I could pick a department and then type in my search in, and then do a search for a product.
Link hello, sign in.
There's the sign in.
Account and lists. Link returns. And orders, link 0 items in cart. Valentine's Day gifts for her button. Valentine cards for kids classroom button. Valentine's Day gifts button. Kids Valentine's Day cards button.
And since we're approaching Valentine's Day, we're seeing a lot of Valentine's Day content.
Valentine's cards for kids classroom button. Valentine's Day gifts for him button. Valentine's candy button.
So overall, this site is very good, right? There's good heading structure. I understand, as I navigate down through the page, by heading, what the content is that I'm expecting, and the content is there. I used arrow navigation. I was able to find a way to search if I didn't want to just try to navigate through the content on the page. I could pick a department, do a search, and then perform that search and get search results. I see where I can sign in. I see where the card is. So it's very clear in the information that's being conveyed to me as a screen reader user. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a different retail site. So I'm going to choose Dollar Tree. So I'm going to go to dollartree.com.
Alt D selected. http://dollar tree.com selected. Enter. https://www.dollartree.com-alert. Alert. Glass vases, party supplies, cleaning and more vertical bar dollartree.com.
Okay, so again, what I'm going to do is do the same thing that I did for Amazon, and I'm going to navigate by heading here. So I'm going to go to my first heading.
On the hunt for gifts, plan your next store trip heading level 3.
So it says on the hunt for gifts, plan your first next store trip.
Blank. Head over heels for DIYs. Visit our value seekers blog. Blank. List box.
I'm going to hit headings again.
Wrapping to top. On the hunt for gifts, plan your next store trip heading level 3.
Okay, so there's only one heading on this page. And because it's a retail site, I would think there would be significantly more headings to kind of break the content down into different sections. So it would be easier for me to understand and perceive what's happening on the page. So now, instead of, and I didn't do this really last time, but I'm going to have to use now arrow navigation from this one heading to try to understand what's happening on the page.
Blank. Link graphic view local ad. Blank. Link checkout or ad.
So one thing I've noticed is when I navigated before by heading to this, the content changed. It didn't read the same way. Before it read different information to me, but I'm going to continue to arrow down.
Blank. Link graphic view and store specials. Blank. Link and dash store specials. Blank. Link graphic view item of the week. Blank. Link item of the week. Blank. List box. List box. List box. List box. List box.
So I don't know really what's going
List
on.
box. Link graphic 16-Uz glass sports mug with handle. Famous dash maker Pilsner glass. 20. Link graphic gold plastic charger plate with beaded rim. Metallic silver plastic charger plate. And blank. Head over heels for DIYs. Visit our value seekers blog. Blank. List box. Number Dollar Tree.
So as you can see, like there was those where it said list box, list box, list box. I don't really understand what that's for.
List box. Number Dollar Tree.
Number Dollar Tree.
Share your finds and creations. Blank. Expand image from Instagram user on January 12th to expand image blank. Link powered by wine.
So now I'm going to go up to the top and see what the content's like from the top of the page. So I'm going to navigate up to the top.
Glass vases, party supplies, cleaning and more vertical bar Dollar Tree.
And I'm going to just down arrow.
Po 5,500,003 is loaded.
And I don't know what that even means.
Link graphic store locator graphic your store : Islandia rad FSB link catalog quick order link graphic order by phone image graphic order by phone 1-877-530-tree.
So it's reading a lot of different content all at once.
Left paren call center hours right paren. Same dash day delivery graphic same dash day delivery link track orders link graphic shop family dollar.
So again, it's reading a bunch of information all at once.
Blank. Visited link graphic Dollar Tree. Extreme values every day. Search dollartree.com. Search dollartree.com edit. Banner region. Escape. Unlabeled 0 button.
All right, so there's an unlabeled button.
Blank. Trending searches. List of 10 items. Hair. Blank. Hair color. Blank. Rustic woodland crisp blank. Halloween costumes. Blank. Blankets. Blank. Play-Doh blank. Scott 1000 blank. Halloween blank. Bleach blank. Laundry detergent. List end. Link shop plus. Account graphic. Account link successfully added to cart.
So it's saying something was successfully added to the cart, and I haven't even looked at anything yet. So that's confusing.
Blank. Link all departments. Holidays, seasons and toys and crafts.
So I'm going to stop here, and this is kind of a contrast to what we saw on Amazon, right? So we saw some things that were unlabeled. We saw information that's confusing. There's only one heading on this page, so a screen reader user would not have the, to really navigate effectively. It's basically one of their main tools that they use to navigate has been taken away from them. And then we had different areas of the page where content was just read all together, and it was multiple items read on one line, which could be, not only confusing to someone with a screen reader, a screen readers, but maybe a person that has multiple disabilities where it's not just a screen reader user, but they may have some cognitive issues as well. So that could be significantly confusing to someone in that position. So this is the difference between a website that really focuses on accessibility and one where it doesn't seem that an emphasis on accessibility has been made.
Great, Joe. While Bethany's sort of just closing out of that video and then bringing back up the deck, hopefully that illustrated, in an audible way, and also, Joe doesn't get to sort of know what's going on the screen, but I'm assuming many people here were also watching on the screen, like where Joe was on the page and whether that was, whether that was logical for him to be there and stuff like that. But I think that also helps e-commerce companies understand two things, hopefully. One is it's very easy to quickly understand whether a website has taken in accessibility or not in when it's doing its coding and design. So, Joe could easily go quickly to a number of retail sites, as we believe that most, lawsuit and plaintiffs are. They're going quickly to an e-commerce site and they're taking that initial their initial experience and thinking, okay, how much has this website done around accessibility? And in Joe's case, probably the first one, they might be like, well, this clearly someone's taken effort in this, and we'll move to another site quite quickly where they haven't taken much effort. So it is very quick and Joe, maybe Joe can talk about this, which is like, how quickly, Joe, can you sort of tell when you first visit an e-commerce site whether that e-commerce company has sort of taken accessibility seriously or hasn't done much?
Oh, usually I can determine right on the homepage, just based on just that small video on the second site, which was probably only about 4 or 5 minutes. I just need a few minutes to kind of navigate using heading navigation, and then just trying to navigate from the top and trying to locate a navigation menu, trying to locate where the cart is, trying to locate just those main components of pretty much any e-commerce site, and how well am I navigating. And that's going to give me probably some insight into what to expect as I go through the shopping experience.
Yeah, and I'd also say the other good news for e-commerce people that are on this call is the work that it would take to sort of clean up the experience for Joe. It is not huge, especially what we just showed you there. So being aware of the experience that is being presented to a screen reader user, and then having a sort of roadmap to sort of address those as quickly as possible will really help a company, one, improve the experience for a user like Joe, but also reduce significantly sort of their risk factor of a plaintiff firm and a plaintiff having a bad experience, and sort of tagging that e-commerce as a site to look at in more detail and build a case around. And essentially, if you imagine that your role or your job was to find 10 or 15 e-commerce sites this month to sue, you would go through a very similar process as what we've sort of shown you here today, which is what's the initial experience like? Let's find the ones where the experience is pretty poor, and let's focus on those sites to then dig a little bit deeper and build the sort of information that we might need to add to a lawsuit to essentially target that e-commerce site under the ADA. And that's sort of like, before we start taking questions, I just want to sort of cover, you know, when a company comes to us and says, what should we do right now? You know, we've got limited time, we've got limited resources. What should we do right now? You know, we would probably follow and give them advice around what we believe most plaintiff firms are doing. So if you focus on what plaintiff firms are doing and what Joe just did, right? Again, you're going to be focusing on things which will improve the overall experience for assistive users, but at the same time reducing your risk. So one of the first things that we would do is, you know, the things that Joe showed, like headers and labels and links and these types of things, they're reasonably easy to find. And actually, we have a service at usablenet.com, which is free to use. And the first thing I would say is go to usablenet.com, go to the free test, put your top pages into that free test, and see how many issues come up. If a lot of issues come up, you probably need to start work. If no issues come up, you're in a lot better place than other e-commerce sites. The second thing that we do is, you know, as I said, websites are on the list of being targeted. Apps are on the list. Other digital contents can also be on the list. We would tell you to inventory your experiences and sort of prioritize based on how public they are. The more public it is, the more likely you'll get into a lawsuit, just because it's easier to visit, it's easier to find issues, it's easier to document. The more private the digital experience is, the less likely it's going to be in a lawsuit. We would tell you to go find someone like Joe and have someone who uses a screen reader, because they're the people who actually, you know, bring most of the lawsuits. Have them use the site in a way that you expect everyone else to be able to use the site. What's the top 3 or 4 user tasks, whether it's, you know, search, find a product, add to cart, whether it's sign up for an account, whether it's add a payment method, and get direct feedback from someone who uses a screen reader to say, yeah, I actually could do all of that. There might have been some issues with regard to understanding and stuff, but I could do most of it, or I couldn't do any of it. That will help you prioritize and know how important this is in terms of something that you need to address. Most companies today have an external company that's building the website. So I would make sure that you're communicating with whoever you are paying to either build or maintain or originally build your website. And also make sure that, you know, if you're looking to upgrade a website right now or buy a new website or add a third-party feature, making sure that accessibility is part of your procurement, right? And then also, you know, we encourage people to internally think about creating an accessibility statement. Even if you don't publish it publicly, it brings all the stakeholders together about what are we going to try to do, when are we going to try and do it by, and how are we going to resource it. And that basically conversation brings to light, you know, the different responsibilities. You know, there's work to be done in the content team, there's work to be done by the design team, there's work to be done by the development team. Who's actually responsible for that? Is that an internal activity? Is that an external activity? How do we put together an internal statement to start with about what we want to do, who's responsible for it, and when we're going to achieve it? So that's sort of our what would you immediately do to get yourself more accessible and less risk, is essentially do the things that we believe that plaintiff firms are doing, and make sure you're involving someone like Joe who uses a screen reader on a daily basis. Bethany, I know we're sort of up around that time where we want to leave a good time for questions. Can you start putting some questions, particularly for Joe, obviously, because we've only got Joe on this session?
Yes. So easy question for Joe. What screen reader are you using in the video?
I primarily use JAWS as a screen reader, but I can use NVDA. I've used VoiceOver both on the Mac platform and on iOS devices. I know how to use Android, so it just kind of depends on what I'm doing at the time.
It's a good question, and I'm going to give some pretext of maybe why it's important to actually think about from your user base, right? Of course, what you want to do is focus when you're doing user testing is to focus on using someone who has a screen reader, which you think are the most likely screen readers that might be used by your users. And when I say that, for example, in Joe's space, where it's sort of a non-profit educational space, most computers are Windows with Explorer, and that means you've got to use either JAWS or NVDA, right, Joe?
Correct.
But most e-commerce sites probably aren't used by educational or non-profit users. They're mostly used by for-profit users, right? Where we would say that, you know, if you're mostly aimed at the private sector, and those private sectors are sort of buying their own technology, you know, our experience is that they would probably use an Apple with VoiceOver. Is a very popular combination. Or they might use Chrome with a free piece of software, not JAWS, because JAWS is an expensive piece of software, which is typically funded by education or funded by big corporates.
Okay. What's the best way for web developers to test websites using screen readers?
What's the best? Are you Henry?
Well, yeah, I take it two ways. One is I think it's always worth having, you know, from a very top level experience, like you've got Joe, who's a user every day of screen reader technology. You know, I'll get Joe to tell us, like, how long did it take you to sort of become proficient in terms of using screen reader to, you know, generally do things that you would expect a general person to be able to do on a regular basis, like shop and bank and and take tests for education, Joe.
How long did it take me to get to that point? Probably about a year or two.
Yeah, so it's probably not practical for a developer to use a screen reader to do testing. It'll take them a year or two to sort of to get proficient in using it. But that's where the great news is, you know, there are a set of code standards, and many on this call will know about them, right? It's called they're published by the W3C. They're called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. The purpose of those guidelines are to identify the way that you build code so they work with Joe's screen reader. If you follow the WCAG and you use the techniques which are there, then you're sort of putting in the tags and the code that Joe's screen reader is relying on. And essentially the two meet in the middle. So you don't have to test with screen readers. What we would encourage you to do is test with your keyboard as if you had a screen reader. So one of the things that you've obviously noticed with Joe is he uses only keyboard. He uses arrow, tab. He has a number of special quick keys, but tab, return, and keyboard to navigate. So if you're a developer and you get rid of your mouse and you use a keyboard, can you get around your site? And then if for example, if you are a developer, maybe you'll use Mac. If you put VoiceOver on, you can use your keyboard and listen to it, right? But using your keyboard, if you can navigate and finish using just your keyboard, then Joe's in a good place, because Joe has exactly the same use case, which is essentially he uses a keyboard, not a mouse.
Okay. Joe, what features or elements do you find to be the most helpful when interacting with search bars with auto completion enabled?
Repeat it again?
Yeah. So both of the sites had search bars. What features or elements do you find to be the most helpful when interacting with search bars with auto completion enabled?
That's actually sometimes one of the trickiest things is when autocomplete's enabled. Sometimes it's not set up right, where JAWS doesn't even realize that it's configured, and I will type in a search, for example, and then tab to the search button, hit enter, and nothing comes up, and I don't know what's going on at all. And you know, I need visual assistance to find out that there's actually an autocomplete, and there's a whole list of suggestions there that I don't even have access to. So the biggest thing with it is actually having it so that it's accessible from the screen reader.
Okay, great. So this is an interesting one. There is a cognitive load required to describe an image in the alt tag, which many can find as a blocker. How do you recommend balancing this cognitive load versus the need to write descriptive alt text? I think that they're asking like how much alt text is like helpful, but that is the question.
Cognitive disabilities is not really my purview, but maybe Jason, you can.
Yeah, I'm actually going to read something a little bit different into that question, right? And it's an interesting one that comes up, which is a lot of e-commerce companies come to us and say, well, we've got all these images of product, right? So we have a product image, and how much do we have to describe with that product image, right? You know, do we have to describe its size, its location, its color, and everything else? Our answer typically is, if the description is somewhere else already, like the product is described in the description of the product, you don't need to put that description into the image. You know, and Joe can talk about this. When Joe's looking at product, he probably doesn't listen to alt tags when he's shopping for products. So maybe Joe, you can explain a little bit, like if you've got, you know, you do a search for shoes and 20 pairs of shoes come up, right? What are you actually listening to on that page to understand which shoes you want?
Oh, absolutely. The thing that I'm looking for on a product description page is the first thing that I'm looking for is the actual description of the product. That's where I feel that the most information is going to be provided. So if I'm not even going to use shoes as an example. So if there's a t-shirt and it's got some sort of silk screen design on it, you know, I want to know what that design is, right? That's important. You know, what's the color of the t-shirt? Those are the things.
But Joe, you're happy, and I'll go back to the way that WCAG is written, right? But you're happy that that's in the description. It's actually not that useful if it was only in the alt tag, right?
Correct.
So what you've got to imagine is we see e-commerce sites as these sort of visual things, and there's nothing visual about them for Joe. Joe sees them as information sites. So there's actually plenty of places that information can be delivered about a product on an e-commerce site, and it doesn't need to be done in an alt tag. An alt tag needs to be used when the image delivers unique content. So of course, if you're a website which is sort of has images which are just that are showing off something unique, you need to describe them. But most e-commerce sites do not need an alt tag on an image unless that image is portraying something which is not available in the normal description of the product. So you got to think about, does the image display something unique that is not clear from the description and the other information in the PDP or in the PLP? Because I'll promise you, if you observe someone like Joe using a website, hardly ever on an e-commerce site will he go to alt tags and listen to alt tags. He will be listening to what information is on the PDP or the PLP in the description sections. And that's where you need to make sure the information exists for him to make a decision.
Okay, we're getting a lot of questions and I'm just trying to pick out the ones that I feel like will be the most valuable to the most people. And that will also be the Joe can answer for us. Here's a seemingly straightforward one. When it comes to complex pricing on e-commerce, what's an ideal way for price to announce? For example, sale $8.99, regular $10.99, $4.99 a pound. Like, is there an ideal way for pricing to be formatted and announced?
The screen reader, if it in the first example, like sale $8.99, regular price $12.99, the screen reader is going to read that clearly, and that information to me, sale price is $8.99, regular price is $12. That's clear. Even the second example is clear. You know, I don't generally find that's never been an area where I find a lot of the problems with information that's conveyed. Usually.
Okay. When you start the navigation of a website, if you find a skip link to activate some accessibility features like a widget, what do you usually do?
Ignore it. Because because my experience with any sort of widgets is some of the widget companies, they'll want you to enable that, and then they'll have like almost like a sub menu to enable stuff for screen readers. And a lot of times it's the widget provides a secondary screen reader. So now I have a second screen reader talking that I need to learn how to use. And it's just not an ideal situation, because that screen reader, even if I learn how to use whatever screen reader is there, it doesn't really change the experience on the page. A lot of times the widgets actually make things worse.
Okay. And then when does long copy hurt and when does it help? Is shorter always better?
It depends on, I guess, the content itself, on what you're trying to convey. I think it depends on the scenario, the situation. Sometimes short copy works, sometimes long copy is necessary.
Okay. I think that's a that's a good answer. Okay. Just reading through we're getting more questions coming in, and I don't want to repeat too much here. If we do not get to your question, I'm going to pull a report and I will send the questions over to Jason and Joe to answer. So we will get back to you. Okay, aside from increased litigation, what do you see for the future of digital accessibility?
Well, the first thing I think that most of the, let's say that the business world wants is sort of clarification of what they need to do. So there are actually some there's a bill proposed right now, which could potentially, formalize what should be done. I think more importantly for businesses, it might also define sizes of businesses, which will need to make sure that they do a certain level. And also they want to address in this bill, they want to address what we see as a big problem at the for small businesses is that small businesses are paying CMS companies to give them a website for a few $100s, and then they could get a lawsuit that's going to cost them $10,000. So how does the responsibility for delivering websites that are accessible sort of fall on some of the bigger CMS companies rather than the smaller companies who are buying these websites? So some legal clarity. The most recent bill that's proposed may come in to help smaller companies, and also potentially give companies some time to respond and to remediate issues that are reported. So today there's not much written to help protect companies of any particular size, and it's not easy for a company to act quickly enough to avoid the lawsuits.
Is it easier to avoid lawsuits if you achieve WCAG 2.1 compliance versus only achieving 2.0?
My experience is that most law firms today that are suing reference 2.1. But primarily, I believe that they're testing mostly 2.0. So you could argue that if you're in a very good shape around 2.0 AA, you're going to produce a lot less issues that the plaintiff firms might use in a lawsuit. But if you do get a lawsuit, they will push to get remediation settlements around 2.1. So there's a way up. And I would say that 2.1 should be the target. The prevailing version should be the target for most companies, because the difference between 2.0 and 2.1 is not huge, especially if you're starting out building a new website. So I would encourage people to do 2.1, but from a practical perspective, 2.0 AA will most likely reduce your your target with regard to lawsuits.
And then we covered this in a blog recently, but someone asked about your experience navigating through emails. Are companies taking care of accessibility in emails as well? I mean, I would imagine that's huge for e-commerce, especially.
A lot of email content is not accessible. It's a lot of images that are just unlabeled, and I'll get an email from a retailer, and save 50 to 75% off of whatever, and then I read through the email and I could not tell you anything that's on sale in the email.
Yeah, I mean the risk is this: a lot of e-commerce companies rely on visualization to sort of make impact, even on emails. So even for Joe's example, it might be that it's described that it's 30% off today, but in the email there's this nice little image with sort of the code to use, and the code is only in the image and not written in the email. And the key is you don't need to, for me, it wouldn't even be trying to put alt tags in the image. Just make sure that there's an alternative description of anything that you've got visually displayed, and it's in the body of the email. So Joe doesn't have to look for it. Joe doesn't have to think, oh, is there an alternative text to this image? The detail of the promotion that's been designed beautifully to catch people's eye should be just part of the main content of the email, so it's clear and Joe can use it.
Yeah, and that's we covered that in a recent blog, and I can send that out in a post email. And one of the points that was made is that that may be, when you think about accessibility, thinking about it from a holistic way, thinking about your customer's full experience, and that would include email. And then also making sure that your teams are trained on accessibility, not just your website team, but if another team is sending out the emails, we obviously want to make sure that that experience is accessible for customers like Joe too. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out the webinar.